Hello and welcome to CT Politics TV. I am veteran political strategist Dan Newmyer. And as some of you may know and others may not, politics kind of runs on a cycle, right? We have three basic cycles, which are municipal elections, which we're in a municipal year now. We have state level and sometimes a congressional. U.S. Senate, or we have a presidential cycle. So this is the municipal cycle in Connecticut. And the capital city, as my guest just informed me, has 9 candidates running for mayor of Hartford. Mayor Luke Bronin announced that he wouldn't be seeking another term and wasn't going to run, and the field's pretty crowded. So I've decided that what better way to spend the summer than to interview all these folks and find out about them. It's a little detour from the legislative and capital stuff we're doing, but it's no less important because all politics are local, and the folks that affect your life often the most are your local politicians who work in your cities and towns across the state and administer your government to you. And so it's important to know these folks and meet them and understand why they're running and what their backgrounds are. So our first candidate on deck here is Stan McCauley. And so I'll bring him on right now. Hi, Stan. How are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I am having a good day, and thank you so much for coming on my little program here.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yes. So, Stan, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and, where you grew up and went to school, and then kind of how you got into politics and community service.
Well, I grew up in a town called Hilltown, Pennsylvania, Percy, near Percy in Bucks County, the county from Pearl S. Buck. And so I attended high school there, graduated, went on to aviation maintenance school, worked to become a aviation maintenance technician, and out of school got hired by Pratt & Whitney. And that is how I got to Connecticut. I was working on the F-100, to wind that clock back way back. The F-100, which was the power plant for the airborne weapons system, better known as the F-15, F-16 fighters. And so I was a quality assurance inspector on the assembly floor. And that's how I got to Hartford, Connecticut.
That's really interesting. And my son just graduated CT Aerotech and is taking his last FAA oral and practical for power plant. So he's passed the airframe and stuff. And he's actually working at a company called Enidine in I think it's Bloomfield, and they build wiring harnesses for various jets and stuff like that. So we're big aviation fans here, and so you're starting out real well with me.
Well, aviation runs in the family. My dad was the director of maintenance for Altair Airlines, which was bought up by Allegheny or U.S. Allegheny. I think Allegheny became U.S. Air, which became on and on. But when I actually came up here, I flew on Altair to Hartford for my interview, and I was Jim's kid. So Jim's kid is from So
that's good. You got to come in with a little something.
Yeah,
right?
big aviation. Big fan of keeping Brainerd open. I don't know why anybody would.
Oh, you're all right. You're already on my good list.
Yeah. So aviation. My daughter is a flight attendant for Delta. So we got like 3 generations of aviation people. So
well, that's great. So how old were you when you made that trip to Hartford?
I originally came to Hartford when I was 18 years old,
Okay.
and came here for a tour of Pratt and Whitney as part of our, educational process, if you will, at the Upper Buck School of Aviation Maintenance Technology. We went on tour of several different factories. Lycoming was one. Schnesnick, which made propellers, was another one. And of course, Pratt and Whitney. And so I came to Pratt and Whitney. I was like one of the youngest in the class. There were like three of us that were 18 years old. We started 17, 18, graduated when we were 19. And everybody else in our class were ex-GI. They were like 30 years old. And of course, at 18, 30 years old is like, oh my God, these guys are old. And they kind of like took care of us. And they brought us to the big city, So we were here in Hartford. And I remember after the tour, the guys brought, they came into the city. And it was then that I fell in love with Hartford, Connecticut. It seemed like this little town that was picked up out of the blue and just dropped in the middle of these woods. Because as you drive into Hartford, you see the city sitting in all these trees. And I just fell in love with it. Outside of Philly is where I'm from. But it just was gleaming. It was 1980, what? 1980? No, 1979. What am I talking? 1980? Yeah, 1979. When I first came here, and just I moved here when I was 19, and started getting involved in just of all things, like evangelical outreach, doing ministry stuff. So I would hand out gospel tracts, and that's how I really got kind of like interwoven into the fabric of Hartford. That led to writing a gospel article in one of the local papers called the Northern Agent, which then led to doing radio on what was then WMLB at 1550 AM. That led to a television program on the public access station, which fast forward leads to here, because I eventually became the CEO and executive director of Hartford Public Access Television. Ran for mayor in 2007 against Eddie Perez, because doing my television program, I was always highly critical of what was going on in the political realm. And I was a big fan of Kerry Saxon Perry and the strong mayor form of government. And one day in 2006, around Christmas, this voice came to me and said, keep your mouth shut as it relates to things politics, unless you're willing to put your hands in the soil. And that's when I announced I was going to run against Eddie. And I have been going ever since. So as far as I'm concerned, I have yet to win an election. I haven't lost. I have yet to win. Hartford's lost every time I've run, because they've always picked for my opponent pool.
Okay.
That's the condensed version.
That's fair enough. So, so you're committed to this, and look at a lot of people take several runs at the Hill, and it takes that to figure out how to run a campaign, how to campaign, how to build your narrative, and convince people, get a consensus that you're the man for the job.
Absolutely.
When you think about Hartford, I mean, there's a lot of challenges. Hartford has, a history of segregation, of course. It still wrestles with those issues today, and how housing and development and crime and all these factors figure in. And it's not an easy job. I mean, and you, I'm sure, know this in terms of if you put Hartford, if you look at some of the articles on Hartford, it puts it pretty low on the scale of best cities. And I think some of that's unfair, but there's a lot of challenges there. So, what made you decide to take this on, and what do you see the major problems of Hartford as being, and what needs to change?
Well, I think one of the things that Hartford suffers from is, if there is such a thing, I guess a city that that's broken, defeated, a low self-esteem, if a city can have such a thing. Hartford, in my opinion, is not mismanaged. It's not managed at all. Hartford is a town that is so small that it's almost criminal that the level of incompetence that has been manifest here over the years is allowed to continue. So one has to almost ask oneself, to what degree is what we see intentional? Because the problems that are here are not so looming that they're insurmountable. This is not Watts. It's not the South Side of Chicago. It's not Detroit. It's not Miami or some huge city. It's Hartford. I mean, you could literally take Hartford proper and set it inside the footprint of O'Hare International Airport, which is an authority of the city of Chicago. And so what Hartford lacks is a leadership that has a clear vision for the problems that face Hartford, and as a result of that vision, solutions for what needs to be done. Hartford is a city that has high unemployment. Those are things that could be resolved if one is serious about resolving them. A lot of the things that face Hartford are kept, I guess, neatly tucked away. Hartford, very good at camouflaging its poverty. All the main thoroughfares are sanitized. And so there's what I refer to as the three Hartfords. But in that third Hartford, where the poverty-stricken individuals live, they're like 1 to 2 blocks back off the main thoroughfares. So if you're going up Farmington Avenue, Maple Avenue, Asylum Avenue, Albany Avenue, to some degree, particularly now that they've started the streetscape, it looks nice. You can come through it without feeling guilty. But if you go back and start to see some of the housing stock and how it's deteriorated, how there has been a seemingly intentional redirection of monies that should be going to alleviate problems that we see manifest through the poverty. The state at the state level directs funds to the city. The federal government directs funds to the city. But the funds that are intended to help those that are in poverty always seem to wind up being redirected somewhere else. So you never see the impact of good intentions being carried out, because at the end of the day, those decisions are ultimately made at the local level. And so it was my determination, after covering many school board meetings, city council meetings, I've covered community meetings ad nauseum, literally, and I'm not exaggerating, thousands of these meetings over the years, where you hear the same problems over and over again. And in Hartford, it would seem that the conversation about the problem is deemed as the solution. Well, we had a meaningful conversation, but what we never have is intentionality around implementing the fix. I literally have recordings of conversations and meetings about traffic calming that are 10, 15 years old that you just now see coming online. And so if you attack problems at that rate, if you're talking about schooling, by the time the issues are actually implemented, the kids who are affected by it have graduated and gone on to master the failure that they were destined to be involved in. So Hartford needs leadership that understands the problems, more importantly, understands the communities that are affected by the problems, so that those community leaders can be rallied, pulled together, given the resources necessary to turn Hartford around. It is something that can be done. It's just a matter of, is there someone intentional on getting it done? And that doesn't even scratch the surface of like the nonprofit industrial complex that is here, and the number of people who profit off of the poverty. And so there's a saying that we have in some of the circles here in Hartford, that the poor don't need to, quote, I don't mean this as a derogatory term,
please, yeah.
That the poor don't need to pick cotton, because they are the cotton. So they are the ones being exploited for the political, social, and economic gain. And they are a captive audience that keep the power structure here permanently in place. And people don't want to have this conversation. You add to that the 61%, well, between 41 and 61, depending upon the data and the years that you use to get that data, percent of the adults in Hartford are functionally illiterate. So when you have people talking about jobs, if you talk about economic revitalization and economic development that's supposed to impact the very people who are poor and impoverished, you know they're not really serious. Because if you can't read an ATM machine, then you're not going to be able to fill out an application. And it even gets worse, because if you can't vet the information that someone's telling you about your elected officials, because you can read their track record, read their voting record, read what they said on the south side of town relative to the north side of town, you can't hold them accountable. So you fall into the trap of, well, what I had heard was, or what so-and-so said. So bell cows wind up being the default representatives of the community, and then they tell you what they want you to hear, and you're held captive to just believing it. So these are things that can be overcome. They're not rocket science. It's a matter of applying the fix and rallying people around that fix. And there is a very steadfast contingency of individuals who profit off of the way things are. And until those people can be overcome through an election process that is made, I think, possible by the fact that our mayor has sought not to run for re-election, I think it really opens up the board now and levels the playing field for whoever gets their message out and has it resonate to really get some traction.
You hit on a really good point. Is literacy rates are abysmal in Connecticut cities, and if you could solve one problem that would make a huge amount of difference, stop the school to prison pipeline, as they call it, it would be teaching kids to read.
Absolutely.
And if you take, all this money that was dumped and everything, and I know this because I worked for a candidate that ran against Rosa DeLauro and just said, look, if we took all the COVID money that was sent to the city of New Haven, and you paid Yale students to go and teach kids to read $100,000 a year, it would have been better spent on the back end with keeping kids out of jail and getting them good paying jobs, because they'd be literate.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm not an expert on any of the charter schools and those things, but how do you feel about the education system and what needs to be done there to turn that corner? I mean, a lot of people have tried, but maybe, what's the solution, or what do you think could help get kids reading at a better level?
Well, we have a plan. We call it the path to impact. It's the 6 priorities to realign Hartford's, to realign Hartford's priorities. And we have a 6-point plan that will accomplish that. One of them is education. It's our first priority. And that is it's education. And as a condition of employment, as it stands of right now, there are five department heads who would have to serve on the Board of Education. Procurement department, MHIS, which is Metro Hartford Information Services, that do all of the data. They currently have roles of responsibility within the city as well as within the Board of Education. But my camera gets me into a lot of places, and my clients vary from one end of the spectrum to the other. But you're taping something in a classroom that's supposed to be ready for technology, and they're not editing because none of the editing suites have been installed on any of the computers in the class, because MHIS has more important things to do than to install that. And so this is just one class, and they're responsible for all of the technology inside the schools and within the city. And so you have departments, you have entities working in silos, which brings us to another one of our key priorities. And that's the people working outside of the silos. But with my appointments to the board, and with our strategy for attacking the problems that face the Board of Education, I just believe that if you hold people accountable the old-fashioned way, you'll get things done. I'm one of those people, as an elected official, that has no problem going to court for wrongful termination. I will fire you. It's the old-fashioned words that people steer away from, for malfeasance and a failure to deliver on your end of the contract, which is to have kids that graduate and actually can read and write and function in the society. If they were in any other business, it would not be tolerated. It wouldn't be tolerated at McDonald's. It wouldn't be tolerated anywhere, but it's tolerated at the schools. When you couple that with how you see money being spent with contracts and who gets contracts for the money that comes in, we have serious issues. So if I hire you and you hire people, but the people you hire aren't qualified to do the job, so you have to get consultants to come in to either teach them or do the work, it says to me I've hired the wrong person to be running the school. It's not personal. I mean, you might be some of the nicest people in the world, but at the end of the day, the schools are there to educate our children, who are supposedly the number one quote unquote asset that we have within the city. They're our future. So if kids can't read at the third grade and you start designing your prisons based off of that, we've got a very, very serious problem. Because as you aptly stated, if we took that money and gave it to students at Yale, they have those kids reading in 3 or 4 months. Kids read in several languages around the world that don't have proper shoes to wear to school, that they're formidable when it comes to understanding English, their native language, and 2 or 3 other languages. Yet here in Hartford, we can't read at the third grade level, and 61% of the adults are functionally illiterate. That is a crisis of such monumental proportions that I think it goes over people's heads. If we were a country, we would have a national security problem, because our citizens can't read to operate life-saving critical issues and instructions on how to defend themselves from an impending threat. It hampers adults who want to go in and be helpful with their kids, because they're intimidated. They get to the school, the teachers make them feel small because they can't read. So they're more likely not to be engaged in their children's education at school. So all of these things work together. So there has to be a much more focused, intentional approach to rethinking how we do education. And when I say rethinking, it's pretty much going back to a way that worked. Not back to a time that it wasn't inclusive, but back to a time that worked. So my appointees to the Board of Ed, person I would push to have the position of chair, along with our other initiatives, the school governance councils being fully energized to be able to do the jobs that they're supposed to be doing, along with our dream coaches and other things that we have listed in our education, platform, if you will, are strongly designed to attack the issues that we have been talking about.
Yeah. How do you feel about charter schools, or another way? Because I mean, obviously, one of the things that would be, that stands in the way of much change are the teachers unions and stuff, and their grip on things. But there's also, to my understanding, there's a shortage of teachers, which is really sending kids home early some days, and you know uh, I've heard of solutions where they want to reach out to more people of color early on in their educations, and build incentives to try and attract people of color into teaching positions, to help children, see mentors who look like them, and have made something of their lives, and as a incentive for them to feel included in the process. But I know that some charter school solutions seem to have some pretty good results with that. What do you feel about charter schools?
I don't have anything against charter schools in principle.
Mhm.
A lot of the charter schools kind of cherry pick their students, so their
Oh.
record of success becomes much better than the public schools, who are left with the students that weren't cherry picked out. The charter schools, while charter schools are indeed public schools, the charter schools operate on a different wavelength, if you will. Charter schools were originally started by the union as ways to come up with best practices that can then be exported to the rest of the system. And I often, you'll often hear that the union is a major impediment. And I think the union can be an impediment. But in Hartford, I can't speak for any other urban area within Connecticut or around the country, but in Hartford, I think that if the teachers union were to have a better relationship with the administration, where everybody is on the same page working together, the teachers union could actually be an ally. To me, because of the way the state of Connecticut is set up as a employee at will state, if you will, or a right to work kind of a state, you don't have any protections other than that happens through a contract. So the teachers union provides the security for the teachers that are employed. So to me, the failure to deliver is on the teachers union. We have a contract with them to produce children who can read. Now, I shouldn't have to be the bully. They're your teachers. They are accountable to you. The teachers don't look bad at this point. The union looks bad. So why can't we work together to make sure that your union members are up to snuff to deliver what's necessary? I'll do all I can. I'll move mountains. I'll go to Washington. I'll grovel. I'll juggle gallon bottles of nitroglycerin if I have to get you the money that you need. But I expect in return for that money, impact on the student. Because you getting a raise impacts your family. You getting a raise impacts, whether or not your kids can go to college. But what's the impact for the kid who can't read? Little Johnny, little Shaniqua, how are they going to be better by your raise? So while I understand that you would like to have a raise, I would like to see a raise in my young people's education. I would like to see them impacted by what happens over here. And if you can't give me a path to impact that ends with them being better, and I don't mean 8 years from now, I mean, I cut you a check, you immediately feel the impact. How long is it going to take for that impact to get down to these kids? So if you have schools that are safe, if you have an environment that is, that creates the kind of atmosphere that's open to teaching. If teachers are allowed to do, which I believe is a God-given gift, teach instead of being turned into, human AI, uh, uh, which is just, going off of some sort of script where the challenges and the rewards of teaching are made evident, then I don't think you'll have a shortage of teachers. In Hartford, teachers are punished for success. Principals are punished for success. And so the backstory on why these things are happening is what's left out of the mix. And so the teachers union winds up becoming the fall guy. Are there issues with the teachers union? Absolutely. But are they the sole cause of it? Absolutely not. It's been my experience as somebody who's been in business that people don't leave their jobs, they leave their employer, they leave the boss. So if you see teachers bailing out in mass, that's an indicator that the leadership within the realms and where they're teaching is the problem. Because once upon a time, people flocked to teaching. What changed? How teachers are allowed to do their job is what changed.
That's true too. One of the, of course, so here's the thing. In Connecticut, you'll have two camps of people, right? Mm-hmm. Who say, crime is the lowest it's ever been. And, going back a decade, you can look at the records and this and that and the other thing, but they've been arresting less people and jailing less people, and they've been letting more people out of jail. Is there more crime or less crime or the same crime? And policing has changed, hasn't it? With police accountability and it almost seems like there's a lot less pressure on people who are doing the crime than there used to be. We also have an opioid epidemic, and some of the things that are being put forward are after school programs and things to keep kids busy into the evening that would work in conjunction of the schools and stuff like that. But what about crime in Hartford? What about gun violence and that type of thing? What's your take?
I think that administrations love to point at crime when they're challenging the administration. The current administration, had Hartford as the murder capital of New England. As soon as they got in and the crime was the same, then we have an uptick. So, their choice of words is relative to where they are positioned. I'm probably one of the only people who has taken a public stance. One of my other hats is president of the Greater Hartford African American Alliance. And we stood on the steps, in the middle of the pandemic, calling for the removal and termination of our current police chief, Jason Thody, which the union has taken 2 votes of no confidence on. In our first, in our press conference, we talked about what would be happening then, because you can see if someone is on track here, you can tell where they're going to end up if they don't change. Now, that might be success. It could be failure. But we got enough past history to know that this action leads to that action. Crime was off the chain. Crime was off the chain. Now, our mayor, no fault of his own, happens to be a Caucasian or white male. No problem with that at all. But if you want to be the mayor of a city that is quote unquote black and brown, you don't get soft on crime because you don't want to be called a racist. To whom much is given, much is required. The people being affected by crime are black and brown. So black and brown people are the ones being affected by crime. They're the ones being held hostages in their houses. So the only legal force of human beings that can enforce the rules and take people and arrest them with a gun on their hip and a baseball bat is the police. They've been sanctioned by us, the community. That doesn't give the police the right or the freedom to treat people as though they are guilty. The police don't make that determination. The courts make that determination. So rogue cops need to be dealt with as rogue cops. And I think that holding police accountable is no different than holding your surgeon accountable or your doctor accountable or anyone else that is in a profession that has life-threatening consequences. Pilot fails his check flight, he doesn't fly anymore. You're captain of a 747 and you fail the check flight, you're grounded, because we hold you to a high standard because you're flying 300 people around the world and you can't just pull over and park. I would expect the same to be of police officers. And so I believe, just like the teachers, the police officers need to be given the resources necessary to do the job. They need to be supported. But when they are wrong, they need to be held accountable for the wrong. And I think it's disingenuous of the police to act as though, because they're being held to the standard of someone who is literally licensed to use deadly force, that they're being held to a high standard, that they're somehow being singled out and persecuted. They're police officers, just like our fire department goes into burning buildings to save lives. They take on a role that most people wouldn't dare to rise to, and they are necessary components of the community. I think one of the things that we do see in Hartford as it pertains to the police is the fact that they're not necessarily from the community. So many see them as an occupying force as opposed to a force that's there to protect and serve. These are things that can be changed with the correct leadership. So if you have leadership that drives recklessly in a police vehicle, hitting guardrails and everything else, and people look the other way and they get a slap on the wrist, what message does that send to the rank and file? When they're held to the same standard, what standard does it send to the rank and file when you use internal affairs as you weaponize that to hold your police officers accountable? So unlike a lot of politicians, I'm one of those people that shoot straight from the hip. I'm very, very frank and to the point, because at the end of the day, the truth is going to come out anyway. So I believe that the leadership at the police department is currently incompetent. It was incompetent before it got here. It remains incompetent. And I've publicly said this. So this is not like breaking news or something that I'm saying to besmirch Jason Fody. I think he's a great human being, but his leadership style has failed the department. And we see the result of that. People bailing out in mass, and they're not going to be easily to be replaced.
When there's a vote of no confidence, and you've said this guy's had 2 of them, is how are you able to remove that person? Is that up to the mayor to do that, or is that up to the city council to do that, or who says, look, you're out of here?
One of the two. It's either the mayor, or by supermajority, it could be forced by the city council. So you can't just fire a police chief or a fire chief. There has to be just cause, because of the state statutes and things along that line. But I think that there are more. There's more. How shall we say? There's more than cause to give him the option to find another city to practice his trade in. And if I were mayor, he would not be here. And so, as I mentioned to the mayor and to the president of our city council, the failure of the police chief to be removed is at some point, it's not the police chief's problem. It's the mayor's problem. And or the city council and the city council president's problem. I mean, he is not sacrosanct to the degree that he's unaccountable to anybody. So you either are signing on to his bad attitude and actions, or you're going to hold him accountable. I don't believe we're elected to be friends. I believe we're elected to do a job, and our job is to run and manage the city on behalf of our constituents, and to move the city forward on behalf of those constituents, whether they be the bum in the street, whether they be the criminal who happens to reside in Hartford, or whether they be the corporate titans. They're all citizens and constituents. And the job of the mayor is to make sure that everybody's needs are met, that everybody is protected, and the things that are impediments to that are under his or her control, need to be dealt with in a way that people understand that there's leadership. Right now, I think we have incompetence. It looks good. The press conferences are glossy. There's a lot of lipstick on this pig we call Hartford right now. And there are many who would like to just take the baton and carry that forward. But there are very few who are willing to address the issues that are at hand, where we can actually get these things done. I believe that with my leadership and the right team working together with other elected officials, whether they be, a very well established and well run town committee. I'm not suggesting that the one that we have is or isn't, but with the town committee being that first line of elected representatives, along with our state delegation that we have, and the leadership in the up on the hill, which is like 3 blocks from where I live, we can make Hartford the shining star that so many remember that it was and hope that it can be.
Yeah, when you came into Hartford and Pratt and Whitney, you remember what East Hartford was like, and the city is that the streets weren't paved with gold, but they were brand new. It had new curbing, and there were lots of people with good paying jobs, and F-16s taken off from where the football stadium that nobody goes to is now, and it was much more vibrant and less of a burned out feeling, right? Than today. And we have great companies. We have a lot of investment in the aerospace, defense industries, and everything. How do you see economically attracting business to Hartford, and how do you see Hartford, I guess, changing and becoming more of a kind of a metro area where people want to come and live and have it flourish more? I know, there's a lot of movement to these kind of walkable cities and a lot of ideas to kind of recapture the riverfront and that type of stuff. And this is all getting us to the Brainerd Airfield thing, but we'll put that off just a little bit. What kind of changes would you do to bring more people into Hartford, and how do you feel about the hockey team idea?
I think the hockey team idea is a quote unquote. I'm not opposed to it. I do a morning show, and Howard Baldwin was actually a guest on at the time on one of the programs, and he talked about how the hockey team got here, the Whalers, and the kind of intentionality, the kind of leadership that was in corporate Hartford at the time, and just a set of circumstances that placed Hartford at the perfect nexus to bring the hockey team here. And the popularity of the Whalers is legendary. It's still one of the number 1 brands in the NFL that is sold. The team hasn't been here forever. I think the hockey team coming here, if it isn't a huge cost burden to the city, would be fabulous. There are several different things that you could do to bring life and vitality back to Hartford. I think that the Wizards of Smart need to focus a little bit more on the people who actually live in Hartford coming to fuel Hartford's economic engine, as opposed to always reaching outside of Hartford. There's this sense that Hartford's salvation will only come from people who live outside of Hartford coming into Hartford spending the money. But when you come in here on a Sunday and everything's closed, if you come in here at 4 o'clock and everything is closed, the dynamics of downtown have changed greatly. So people have to be a little bit more inventive in terms of what they do to get people here. Arts, entertainment, culture, is an industry that, in my opinion, is not even being tapped. We do live in a time when people are used to seeing things on platforms such as the one we're on right now. And there's an insatiable need for content. Whatever you watch is going to end, and when it goes off, the golden question in our business is now what? Like what next? How do you outdo the show you just did? Is the ongoing drama, and you see with the Writers Guild strike right now. So I'm out of the entertainment industry. I've had many conversations with people who produce Hollywood movies and television shows that live in Connecticut, but they go to New York, they go to Los Angeles, they go to Atlanta to do their trade. I remember when Jim Amon tried to do Hollywood East, and it got off to a pretty good start, and then he had the audacity to run for governor, and so the political fallout was they cut the legs out from underneath Hollywood East. But I still think that was a fabulous idea. I think it's a tremendously good idea. And there are several tracts of land here in Hartford that right now would be prime for the creation of movie production studios that could produce content for Hulu and YouTube and Amazon and digital information such as teaching products where teachers become rock stars in helping to supply things that kids learn through remote learning, and the whole just creating a whole kind of like, if you will, an Atlanta North, where you're producing whether it's the Spanish novellas. Hartford has 76 different ethnic groups in the city. You could literally go to an eatery or a community center somewhere in this city and have an true ethnic setting to create groups from all over the world, right here in Hartford. There are a lot of movies that are shot in Hartford, a lot of Lifetime movies. We've got great places to shoot down by the river. And you could create a whole industry from the ground up. And you've got the individuals who can learn a lot of the new technology that is used in creating programs. The program we're doing once upon a time would take a crew of 20 people on both sides of the camera to pull this off. And now it's something that we could do ourselves and with a minimum a staff of maybe 2 people. But with green screen and virtual sets, there isn't anything that you couldn't produce in Hartford. And we've got people that, who produce movies, who want to shoot in Hartford, want to shoot in Connecticut. The tax credits, I recently was up at the state capitol speaking on behalf of the tax credits. If our tax credits here were in line with, our surrounding neighbors, that would make us much more competitive. But Hartford being impacted by the poverty that it is, there are a lot of people and there's a lot of money that if you're going to build in an area that's impacted by poverty, then you really can unlock potential. So for instance, if you take the strip of land along Homestead Avenue, where there's a lot of abandoned buildings, and like the whole left side of the street as you're going north, or rather going west on Homestead, it's all open. It's for the most part, it's just barren ground. Well, you go up that corridor, and then now you're at the University of Hartford. You're at Weaver High School. So there's a whole mechanism where you can have the young people learning. They can go through University of Hartford, and then they can come out and come into this technology corridor of the arts. There's theater, there's television, there's motion pictures, and these things just name a few. So if you get the right product and the right production, it's a $1 million moneymaker. You build critical mass and you start having teams of people, and you begin to build the infrastructure, and you build the workforce that is necessary to attract other companies to come and shoot here. And so, that's my idea. That's what I would do. But I think that all of the ideas that people have, if unlocked, the potential for Hartford's, resurrection, if you will, comes from the people that are right here in Hartford. The problem is that when they have ideas, they didn't originate where the king of ideas is, so they're shot down. There's no shortage of ideas.
I want to hit a couple of things. One, I did a show recently with Scott X. Esdale of the Connecticut ACLU on red light cameras. And that the bill ended up passing. And we were trying to say, look, this is the wrong solution. And I mean, they've proven that typically minorities bear the brunt of costs with this, and it's paramount to almost a tax on people. But at the same time, pedestrian deaths and bicyclists getting hit have been on the rise. And how do you feel about these cameras? I mean, there's already a lot of cameras around Hartford. How do you feel about that particular issue?
Scott and I probably will disagree on this one, and in full transparency, as a client. So I've done work for Scott, but I disagree with the premise that in Black and brown cities, that the people that are impacted most are Black and brown. Not necessarily that they're the ones impacted, but it's not because there's some conspiracy to get Black and brown people. It's just that the people are Black and brown. So if you have Black and brown people, I mean, if you went to Simsbury and had them, I would venture to say that most of the people there that are going to be stopped are not going to be Black and brown people. Now, if Simsbury has red light cameras and the only people that get stopped or ticketed are Black and brown people, then we have a problem.
That's right.
But in Hartford, where only 15% of the people would be considered, quote unquote, white folks, I don't see where the problem is. I do see a problem when we have people literally going 60 miles an hour down Cornwall Street and flying through stop signs like they don't exist. And I would challenge Scott to come up and we walk around Blue Hills or walk around Asylum Hill or walk around behind the rocks, and we go around there with the people who actually live in those communities and want speed bumps on every other street, putting those Jersey barriers so you can't go all the way through one street. So they're Jersey barriering and speed bumping the city to death to prevent people from speeding. And so if red light cameras can be another way to have people understand that there's a consequence for breaking the law. It's hard to get you doing 60 miles an hour if you're not doing 60. It's hard to get you going through a stoplight if you don't go through the stoplight. All right, so
okay. Where our clock is running down, and you brought this up early on, is Brainerd Airport. Now, I did a show with the folks who want to save Brainerd Airport. And so I learned a little bit about the history of Brainerd Airport as being the only airport that the people of Hartford own or have for themselves. And that Amelia Earhart and Charles Lindbergh both flew in and out of there. Our troops flew to go to war out of there. And it has a history with the city that's really kind of unparalleled around the country in terms of a small city airport that really now employs about 480 people in and around it. It is a center for our corporate folks who want to fly in and out of there close to their offices and stuff instead of driving out to Bradley. And it's utilized by CT Aerotech, where the state has a wonderful program. My son just finished up. And when I started to look into some of the issues, is that there had been a previous study done about 15 years ago or so that determined, and it was extensive, that the best use for the airport was keeping it an airport. It sits on toxic waste. It has a dike system put in by the Army Corps of Engineers that cannot be removed without flooding out the whole south end of the city. There's a sewage plant which is not going to be moved anywhere else. And so, how do you? There's a group of folks, and I think there's some candidates I haven't interviewed yet who want to do away with Brainerd Airport, and they want to turn it into kind of an evergreen walk, like they have over there in South Windsor, which a lot of the storefronts are already vacant in, and they want to put high-end condos or something over there. What do you know about that plan?
I testified up at the state legislature to keep the airport open. I was a fan of keeping it open before. Big fan of keeping it open now for all of the reasons you mentioned. And if you ask me, this is the old bait and switch. They're selling you the evergreen walk. They're selling you the condos. They're selling you the opportunity to have riverfront nights. Then when they close the airport, they actually start to do the work. Suddenly, I don't know that we can do all of this stuff. Maybe, well, now that the airport's closed, maybe we could just expand the sewage treatment place. And this sounds like a land grab to me. It is an airport. It is an asset that has been totally underutilized. The potential for immediate economic gain and return is present if there's someone with the intentionality to make that what you're going to do there. It is not owned by the city of Hartford. It's actually still owned by the state of Connecticut. It sits in the city of Hartford. People talk about, we don't get anything for it in terms of pilot. Well, we don't get anything for lots of stuff in terms of pilot. Why is the airport somehow special? So there is an effort by some local power brokers to arrest that land for their own vision, whatever that vision may be. And it would be done at the cost of the citizens of the state of Connecticut. It is a strategic asset that provides certain levels of security that would make it extremely difficult to close, and its absence would be problematic in more ways than we could probably discuss on the air. It is ludicrous, foolhardy, and shows a level of ineptitude and incompetence that is glaring in my never to be humble opinion. I don't know if I can say this.
I think that pretty much sums it up there, Stan.
Okay.
Well, look, if you want to kind of end our discussion here with speaking to the people of Hartford and telling them why you're the best choice for their mayor and why they should vote for you. Go ahead. We got about a minute and a half.
Okay. Well, I fight this fight for Hartford. I believe in Hartford. As quietly as it's kept, I've self-funded all of my campaigns, including this one for the most part. And it's worth it. Because Hartford needs leadership that I believe I can provide, that understands the people of Hartford, knows the communities, with a granular, awareness of what the actual needs are. And I invite people to come to McCauleyformayor.com and, take a very good look at the most comprehensive website of any of the candidates. There is a plan, and it's not just rhetoric or picked out of the sky things to sound good and warm and fuzzy being created by consultants. It's a very well thought out plan. It's the same plan I had when I ran last time. It says we're much more intentional about getting the plan out this time around, because we're intentional about winning because of the opportunity made possible by the absence of the incumbent. It's our time to win. Hartford, you can win. We can win together, and we can turn the city around. You already know that. The question is, will you have the courage to vote your conscience? And if you think that this is something worth doing, get on the phone, call up your town committee people and tell them, vote for Stan, and see what we can do to turn Hartford over to you, the constituent, and make Hartford the shining star it can be.
Stan, it was very nice to meet you, and the hour just flew right by. I'm sure people are going to go over this with a fine-tooth comb and listen to some of your ideas. And they don't sound outlandish. They sound achievable with some determination. So if I put a debate together with the rest of the folks there, are you in?
I'm absolutely in. We can have it jumping out of a plane, underwater, anywhere, anytime, any place. If you have a debate and invite me, I will not boycott it. I will be there.
Beautiful. All right. That's Stan McCauley for Mayor of Hartford. Stan, we'll talk to you again real soon ahead of the election. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay. Well, now we've met the first of 9 candidates for in the race for Mayor of Hartford. Now that Mayor Luke Bronin has decided he's not going to run, it leaves an open seat. And Stan has a lot of ideas which come from a plan that he started on a previous run for Hartford. And he's had time to really think this stuff through. He has answers and solutions for crime, for education, for economic viability and resurgence of the arts. So it's pretty comprehensive. He's thought about it on a number of different levels, and it's going to be interesting to speak with the other candidates and see how they stack up to that. Because if you haven't run before, and this is your first rodeo, you're going to come up against a candidate like Stan, who is competent and has a plan that he can articulate very well. So this has been CT Politics TV, and Stan is the first one through on the great panel of 9 candidates running for mayor. It's going to be interesting to see how this shakes out, and if I can put a debate together. Stan is in anytime, anywhere, and we'll be back to talk about this. Thanks for watching.
Hey, Hartford, Connecticut, I'm talking to you. We got to get out and vote. Vote for Stan McCauley. It's our time. We got to rise up and take it back. Vote for Stan McCauley.
Vote for Stan. You gotta vote for Stan McCauley. Vote for Stan. Vote for Stan. Oh yeah.
It's more to politics than just what your social covers. And it ain't somewhere written down in bold letters. Don't just take my word for it, do your research. Think of your future, look at your bigger picture. Suit and tie, clean up, unity for the righteous. Plotting on action, hands on access. With a light source vision, door to door knocking. Guerrilla style marketing, brainstorm as a collective. Real neighborhood suggestions. Only we know what it is where we living. To make real life decisions. Move on facts, make it manifest back.
You gotta vote for Stan McCauley. Vote for Stan. Vote for Stan. Vote for Stan. Oh yeah. Look at your city. Stop. Take a look around.
Senior. Many of you may know me as the two-time welterweight champion of the world. I'm here to tell you that Democrat Stan McCauley, as our next mayor, will fight for you until the last bell. Help me throw a knockout punch. Go out and vote for Stan the Man.
My name's Stan McCauley, and I approve this message.